What's up? Welcome back to another video. My name is Michaela, aka Moe Kickz, and today isn't going to be a tutorial, but I will be bringing you along through the process of making these New Orleans Saints Air Force Ones. I'll also be mentioning some tips and tricks throughout the video, so if that sounds like something you're interested in, then keep on watching. So I already started off with prepping my shoe with acetone, as well as taping off all the areas I don't want paint on. If you need a more in-depth tutorial on how to do that, I do have one on my channel, and I will link that down below in the description if you guys want to go check that out. So the first thing I'm going to do after prepping is lightening up this dark swoosh. The goal is to get it completely white like the rest of the shoe. So in order to do that, I'm going to go in with a light gray and do about 2 layers of that just to lighten up the black before I go in with white. If I just go straight in with white, I'm probably going to end up using 5-6 layers just to get a nice solid white. So doing 2 really thin coats of that light gray will speed up the process of turning that black swoosh white. Now you're probably wondering, why does it matter to do less layers of paint when the outcome is going to be the same? And it's because the more layers of paint that you have, the more likely your paint will crack when your shoe creases. So you really want to do the least amount of paint possible while still getting even solid colors. And so what I'm doing here, I do to all of my shoes before I airbrush. I take an actual brush and paint a thin layer where all of the panels meet or overlap another panel, just to kind of get into all of those crevices that an airbrush isn't going to get into. I like doing this before airbrushing because it just saves me time from doing more touch-ups at the end. So now it's time to go ahead and airbrush those colors. So I'm going to be covering the swoosh white and then covering the toes in taupe. I'm going to go ahead and do this off camera, but if you need a more in-depth tutorial on that, I also have a video on my channel. So I'll link that down below if you want to check that out too. My next step for this design is to start laying down stencils. I do have separate tutorials on how to make removable stencils using your Cricut machine, and also how to use stencils on custom shoes. There's tons of tips in that video to make sure that when you peel your stencil off, you get a nice crisp line and you have very little touch-ups to do. So I highly suggest checking that out if this is something you plan on using in your future projects. Also, everything that I use in my videos, I will have linked down below in my Amazon storefront, so make sure you guys check that out if you're interested in some of the products I use. So as you can see, I'm starting to lay stencils down while the shoe is still white. This is because the areas that I am putting the stencil on is supposed to be white in the design. So instead of having to paint white in these areas, I can just use the white that's already on the shoe, if that makes sense. So now where I painted the toes taupe, I'm going to lay an outline of the Saints logo on the toes in a pattern kind of similar to the way like Gucci and Louis Vuitton do their patterns. That's kind of the idea I have behind this. So now I'm going to go in with a lighter color on top, so once I peel off that stencil, the logo will show up in that darker taupe that I had previously. So here's how the shoe looks after I airbrushed about 2 to 3 light coats of that color play in the sand. And so after it's fully dried, I'm going to go in and start taking off those stencils. Now you can see what I was talking about with the pattern. The darker taupe shows up underneath this lighter shade. I will have touch-ups to do, but using a stencil just saves up a lot of time from having to do those by hand and trying to make them all look exactly the same. So if you haven't invested in a Cricut already, I highly suggest you do. It's going to be a time saver when it comes to these kinds of projects. You'll definitely get your money's worth, and you're probably going to end up using it for majority of your customs. At this point, I am covering up all of the areas that I want to keep that light tan color. I'm starting to cover all that up because the next color I'll be laying down is black, and I'll be using it along the front of the toe, the lace guard, the heel, and in some of the stencil design. Now when you have to do this in your project where you're putting tape on top of the area you have already painted, you really want to make sure that when you did paint those areas, you use very thin coats and allowed enough time in between each coat for the paint to dry. Because if you're just laying this paint on really thick, or you're just not giving it enough time to fully dry before putting tape or stencils down, when you peel them off, it'll start to lift that paint and you're going to end up having to do more touch-ups. So now that I've finished laying down all of the paint, I'm going to start peeling off all of the tape and all of the stencils. And as you're doing this, you're going to start to see where touch-ups are needed. That could just be because maybe the paint lifted, or your stencil wasn't laying down flat all the way, so you had some overspray, or you need to touch up some of the edges of the panels. That's usually the case. It's going to happen no matter what you do. So once I've peeled all of my stencils off, I went ahead and did all the touch-ups off camera, and then I also did about 2 to 3 layers of top coat as my last step. So here's the finished product. If you guys enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you have any questions about the process, leave a comment down below and I'll try my best to answer them. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribed and hit the bell icon to turn on your post notifications to get notified every single time I post a new video. And don't forget to follow me on social media at Moe_Kickz.